Hi everyone, and welcome to Exploring the Build. If you've just found this place, then welcome. And if you're returning, I'm glad to have you back. I'm Alex, and this is my channel where we explore and theory craft different character builds for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Today, we are doing one of our quick builds, where we'll be exploring a briefly summarized character build for Dungeons & Dragons. And as always with our quick builds, if there's ever a build you'd like to see me explore in the future, be sure to let me know in the comments below. Today's concept comes from Roninhair9615, who asked if we're able to make a Paladin / Whispers Bard multi-class combo that was focused around merging Smite with Psychic Blades to dish out some pretty solid Nova damage. I did ask about whether they wanted to see 2014 or 2024 rules, and with all the new changes coming to the system as a whole, but also specifically to Paladin, 2024 was the way to go, making this our first official 2024 character build. We also have a strong narrative hook. We are a paladin of espionage, whispers, shadows, and secrets. We worship a god that is involved with all of those things. As a Whispers Bard, we would also be involved with all of those things. And I think it makes the most sense for us to be a paladin of Shar. Typically, Shar would probably be more involved with nighttime and stealth and just being completely unseen. In my mind though, this character fits perfectly where we have the charisma to be a face character, social manipulator, but we're also an enforcer of whatever sort of puppeteering or odd master plans are at work behind whatever court or organization we are a part of. I think mechanically there will be a lot of interesting synergy for our two classes, and narratively I think we can pull off a fairly interesting character concept as well. So without any further ado, let's jump into the build. Starting off the build with our origin, in 2024 the way we do origins is mostly the same, but also slightly different. We're going to pick our background first, which is our origin. The background is going to give us an origin feat, as well as determine our starting ability score boosts, and also gives us other things like skills and some starting equipment. But then, after that, we will pick our species, or lineage, and that will just determine what extra flavorful abilities we get based on what kind of character we want to play. For the sake of this build, I'm going to say that we want to increase our strength and charisma most, but you could of course actually do this build as a dex-built paladin. The issue there is that we would end up becoming a little bit more multi-ability score dependent and have to spread our stats out a little bit wider than we would like. So for the sake of the build as presented, I am just going to go with a strength build. In order to improve strength and charisma at the same time, we would have to either take one of the origins that has those ability scores associated with it in the 2024 Player's Handbook, or use a background from an older book, and then we get to choose which ability scores we want to improve. The one thing to note is that if we use one from the book, we are automatically locked into the origin feat associated with that background, whereas if we choose a background from an older book, we get to be a little bit more free in what we pick for our origin feat, such as Courtesan, which I think works a bit better for our character. And because we pick that, we can then increase strength by 2 and charisma by 1, as well as get any origin feat we want. For our species, I'm going to go with human because I'm fairly vanilla and just like having the extra origin feat that human now offers in 2024. And with those 2 open origin feats where we can choose any origin feats we want, I'll say that we're going to want to pick up tough for extra hit points and alert for an extra boost to our initiative. Though reasonably you could pick any 2 origin feats that you wanted if you felt that there were others that fit better narratively for our character, or even mechanically. As far as our stats go, we're going to want the following array of ability scores. We're going to put 9 points into strength, getting it to 17 right away after we also put our +2 in there. I'm going to leave dexterity alone for this build in particular at 8, though you could of course have done a dex build if you wanted to. We're going to put 7 points into constitution to get it to 14. We're going to leave intelligence alone as well at 8. We're going to put 2 points into wisdom, getting it to 10. And then we're going to put our last 9 points, as well as our other +1, into charisma to get it to 16. Now it's time to jump into the actual level breakdown of the build. For the level breakdown of this build and possibly other 2024 character builds in the future, I think I'm going to restructure them to just look at each tier of play. Tier 1 is 1 to 5, Tier 2 is 6 to 10, so on and so forth. The reason I want to do this is because if I were to just go level by level and talk about each and every new feature that we're picking up, what was changed, as well as what we could have taken that also is new and changed, we would be here for a really long time. But if I just did it in typical quick build fashion, where we look at the entire level breakdown all at once, honestly, we'd probably gloss over a few things, miss some of the detail of what we picked and why we picked it. Starting at tier 1, levels 1 to 5, we're going to be Paladin 2 and Bard 3. I would recommend we start Paladin to get training in heavy armor, but after that, you can either go Paladin 2 and then Bard, or you can jump back and forth a little bit. At Paladin 1, we get Lay on Hands, as well as Weapon Mastery and Spell Casting. Weapon Mastery is the new feature that most martial classes get, and it allows us to unlock the Weapon Mastery property of a few weapons. We're going to make sure we unlock the Nick Weapon Mastery for sure, as well as any other one Weapon Mastery that you would like that appears on a light weapon. Reason is, we want to pick up a scimitar right away at character creation, and another light weapon of our choice. That way, when we take the attack action, attack with our one light weapon, we can do 2-weapon fighting with the scimitar in our offhand, and make that attack as part of the attack action as well instead of a bonus action, thanks to the Nick property. There are of course some weird weapon juggling rules that you could add in as well, but we aren't too worried about them, at least for this build in particular, though you could if you want. And if you were interested in learning more about weapon juggling, I would highly recommend checking out the video from D&D Unoptimized, as they went over weapon masteries in full, as well as what weapon juggling is. So now that we know that we want a scimitar and another light weapon, so that way we have 2 attacks as part of our attack action at level 1, right away we can get Divine Favor, which is a bonus action to cast, but it no longer requires concentration, which is a straight buff to the spell. And it is for sure a spell we're going to want to have up, since it can apply an extra d4 of radiant damage to all of our melee weapon attacks. Since we're going to have 2 right away and eventually 3, that is just a nice extra damage boost. Paladin 2 gets us Paladin Smite, as well as a fighting style. We take 2-weapon fighting, because now Paladins have access to all fighting style feats instead of being restricted to a small list. Paladin Smite allows us to learn the Divine Smite spell and always have it prepared, and we can cast it once per day for free at the lowest level. Divine Smite, the spell, is of course the biggest mechanical change for the Paladin class, because it is now no longer a mechanical feature that was baked into the class, but instead an actual spell. It has some ups and downs. One of the downs is that it can technically be counterspelled, though that probably won't happen too often. It is still a possibility. 2 of the ups are the fact that it no longer has a ceiling cap and could technically be cast with a 9th level spell slot, though again, whether or not that would ever actually happen is yet to be seen. Additionally, as a spell, it can actually interact with some features that applied to spells that it couldn't before. The other downside of the change, though, is one that I am also a bit disappointed by, and it is the fact that when we want to cast the spell, we can still wait until we hit an enemy with our attack, and possibly even crit the enemy before deciding to smite or not, but regardless, it's going to eat our bonus action. This means that not only is Divine Smite once per turn, it also kind of wrecks us trying to pick up other abilities that we might want to use our bonus action for. As well, keep in mind that other Smite spells have also had the same change, so they can be activated when you hit with a melee weapon attack or an unarmed strike, but they will also still take your bonus action to actually activate. Now, jumping over to Bard, at Bard 1, we're going to get more spell casting and more spell slots, and our spell slot progression is going to improve faster, since Paladins are now a half caster plus, where basically when you're looking at how to get your multiclass spell slots, instead of doing what you did in 2014, where you take half the Paladin level round down, now you take half the Paladin level and round up. After Bard 1 giving us extra spells, Bard 2 gets us extra skills with Jack of all trades as well as expertise, and that can be really helpful for giving us more out of combat utility, or even push us to be more of a face character, which is pretty nice. Finally, at Bard 3, we get to be a Whispers Bard, and we have unlocked Psychic Blades. Psychic Blades is an interesting feature, since I would agree that it was somewhat overlooked in damage builds in 2014. Of course, there were times when it was included, and rightfully so. but in 2024 it's gotten a bit of a shadow buff. With Divine Smite being now a once per turn ability that is also a spell and costs your bonus action, the Psychic Blades feature from Whisper's Bard has gotten a little bit more appealing. Number one, it is not a spell, so it can't be counterspelled. Number two, it is a once per turn ability, but it doesn't cost our bonus action to activate, so already that is a bit of a one-up that it has over Divine Smite. It scales worse than Divine Smite, so there is that to consider, but because it is based off of our Bardic Inspiration feature, that means that we can have multiple uses of it that also come back on a short rest, whereas Divine Smite, even with that once per day free casting, is still tied to our long rest. I would argue that at this point the Psychic Blades feature is actually slightly better than Divine Smite, just in terms of its raw use for damage over time. In terms of pure Nova or Burst damage, Divine Smite does still win, as it can just be dumped into one big critical hit. But if you're just looking at resources and longevity, I think Psychic Blades takes the win on this one. At tier 2, levels 6 to 10, we are immediately going to jump up to Paladin 3 before we get our first feat. Paladin 3 is going to let us pick our subclass, and here we're going to pick Paladin of Vengeance. Paladin of Vengeance is going to get us our two key features, Vow of Enmity as our channel divinity, and Hunter's Mark as an extra spell. Vow of Enmity got a little bit of a buff since it no longer requires our bonus action to set up. Now it's just when we hit an enemy with a melee weapon attack, we can apply the Vow of Enmity to them and have advantage on all future attack rolls against that enemy until the feature ends. Hunter's Mark, on the other hand, becomes our main bonus action ability besides, of course, Divine Smite. With Hunter's Mark, it is still a concentration spell, but it applies the extra d6 to all of our weapon attacks against a single target. Now, we can have both Hunter's Mark and Divine Favor up at the same time. If we put Hunter's Mark on an enemy, and maybe we already have Divine Favor up, we can walk up, attack them twice, potentially doing 2 attacks of full weapon damage, and a d6 and a d4. And on a third turn following that, if we don't have to move Hunter's Mark, and of course we already have Divine Favor, we could also smite on top of it, as well as use Psychic Blades on that turn or any turn prior. That can add up to a lot of damage, admittedly with a couple turns of setup, but keep in mind, each of these setup abilities are just bonus actions, so we're able to attack the entire time we are setting up. And if we are going up against a boss, we can use Vow of Enmity to have advantage on all those attacks. Continuing on from that, we're going to try and get to Paladin 6 and Bard 4. So next, we'll probably jump either to Paladin or Bard for our first feat, and that is going to be a feat that increases strength. I'm going to say, for the sake of argument and the video as presented, we're going to take Heavy Armor Master. That way we can have a bit of a defensive ability, since we'll just reduce piercing, bludgeoning, and slashing damage by an amount equal to our proficiency bonus. You can, of course, pick the Dual Wielder feat, which would give you an extra attack as part of your bonus action, and it does increase strength as well. But, like I have sort of highlighted, we're already very bonus action heavy. We need our bonus action open to either set up our 2 spells, Divine Favor and Hunter's Mark, or move Hunter's Mark, or cast Divine Smite if we have one key attack that we make that we want to smite on. As much as I would love to take Dual Wielder, I don't think it really fits into this specific character build. Though, by all means, you definitely could take it if you wanted to. Paladin 5 gets its extra attack, Paladin 6 gets its Aura of Protection, and Bard 4, assuming we save that for last, can give us another feat. Here I would just recommend improving your Charisma by +2 by taking the Ability Score Improvement feat, since it is now its own feat. Doing so will get us an 18 Charisma, and that lets us have 4 uses of Psychic Blades, and we're about to get them back on short rests in 1 more level. Though, you could of course not have gotten Aura of Protection just yet and instead go Bard 5, which would allow your Psychic Blades damage to scale, and you would also get them back on short rests. That part is totally up to you. For the rest of the tiers, 3 and 4, aka levels 11 all the way up to 20, you can pretty much do whatever you would like. I'd recommend going Paladin 8 and Bard 12. That gets us higher level spell slots, as well as some higher level spells, since Bard scales a bit faster. It also scales up the damage of our Psychic Blades feature a little bit to a total of 5d6, which can be pretty nice, and we get more of the Whispers Bard subclass features as well, which could also be good if you wanted to focus more on being a face character or out of combat utility, like the narrative of our character would suggest. As for the feats that we would get though, we're gonna get 3 more, and I would honestly recommend any 3, and I suppose if I had to recommend 3 specific ones, we probably want to improve our charisma to 20 just by taking another ability score improvement and improving it by +2. I think Mage Slayer is hard to ignore, given that it'll increase our strength by +1, and it also allows us to be a little more threatening to spellcasters or creatures that rely on concentration-based abilities. The final feature that it offers, Guarded Mind, allows us to just choose to pass a mental saving throw, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, if we would fail, and that is only once per short rest. The final feat would be any other 1 feat that improves our strength by 1 again, and that can be totally up to you. Other than that, that's the build. We are certainly a Sharan Paladin. We have good skills, as well as out of combat utility spells from Bard and the Whispers Bard features to become a more utility or face type character that's going to be good in social intrigue situations. When it does break down to combat though, we are certainly no stranger to it. We do have a couple setup turns. It's going to take our bonus action to cast Hunter's Mark, and then a bonus action to cast Divine Favor. But keep in mind that each turn we're casting those bonus actions, we still have our attack action to do our full 2 to 3 attacks. And Vow of Enmity can be applied during any one of those attacks. Doesn't require a bonus action either, meaning as soon as we want to use Vow of Enmity, going forward we'll have advantage on all of our attacks against those enemies. Now, we aren't as powerful of a Nova or burst damage dealer as we could have been in 2014. That much is obvious, since so many of our burst damage features are now restricted to mainly being once per turn. But to make up for it, we are more of a consistent damage dealer, doing miniature bursts of damage across multiple turns instead of one big Nova round. Now, the last thing to talk about is one thing that I didn't mention during the build, but it was mentioned in the request, and that is going Warlock. Warlock got a lot of changes, and it is still tempting to dip into Warlock in order to become more single ability score dependent and focus solely on charisma for your attack and damage rolls. The reason I didn't do this is because it's a bit too tempting. I did actually make a build that used Warlock with this character, but the thing is, once you go Warlock, you start being tempted to continue going down Warlock, which honestly is kind of thematic for the class. But because of that, we didn't get our levels in Whispers Bard till levels 10 or higher, so the build started to feel less like a Whispers Bard Nova Paladin narrative character and more like we were meshing 2 different builds together. Let me give you a quick example. If we wanted to actually be a charisma-based dual wielder, we need Hexblade. In order to get Hexblade, we have to go 3 levels into Warlock. Level 1 gets us Pact of the Blade, so we can start using charisma for one of our weapons right away, and that's pretty nice. Level 2, we can all of a sudden pick up 2 extra invocations, since you just have 3 invocations at level 2, and that can give us some neat narrative abilities or mechanical combos that synergize well with other features. Level 3, we get our subclass. We're now a charisma-based dual wielder. Level 4 is a feat, so we might as well pick that up. And level 5 gets us 2 extra invocations, one of which could be Eldritch Smite, which is another burst damage dealing ability that we could use in tandem with Psychic Blades, Divine Smite, any other damage features we have. Besides that though, I think this build still feels good to actually play and can still deal a lot of consistent damage and doesn't hurt from missing out on those levels of Warlock. Let me know what you thought of the build though, or what you would add or change to get closer to the idea of a Paladin with Whispers Bard made to be a Nova damage dealer. And as always, thank you so much for coming on the journey with me, and I hope to see you in the next one.